December in Seattle is always cold and damp, with morning drizzles falling on moss-covered streets, and the silent red brick buildings standing like guardians of the city's secrets. Down a narrow alley behind an auto repair shop, there's an old boxing gym, its rusty sign hanging crooked, a flickering yellow light casting a glow onto the rain-slick sidewalk. Inside, the ropes slap against the wooden ceiling, punching bags shudder under the rhythm of fists, and the scent of sweat and tiger balm mixes with the cold air. Everything seems normal until a woman around 40, thin, wearing a faded hoodie, steps inside. Her name is Eliza Carter. She walks quietly, the worn-out soles of her sneakers clicking against the wooden floor. Her grey hair, streaked with the few remaining strands of brown, is tied back, revealing small silver earrings, old and tarnished. She doesn't look around, doesn't greet anyone, just heads straight to the corner of the room, sets down her frayed canvas bag, and begins wrapping her long, calloused fingers with hand wraps. The young guys in the gym pause, eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and disdain. "Hey, old lady, yoga class is next door. You're in the wrong place." Laughter erupts, blending with the thudding of fists against heavy bags. A few pull out their phones, ready to record the comedy that's about to unfold. Eliza says nothing. She looks down at her hands, the blue veins standing out, a long scar running along her left wrist, a scar she's carried for 12 years, from a wildfire night in Oregon when she was still a firefighter, carrying an 8-year-old boy through a sea of flames. That night, she lost her teammate, the husband she loved most, to the thunderous roar when the roof collapsed. She survived. But from that moment, she was no longer the woman she used to be. After taking early retirement due to a spinal injury, Eliza scraped by with odd jobs, waiting tables at a late-night diner, cleaning classrooms, watching cars at an old shopping center. Each day passed in a loop: wake up, work, go home, eat a cheap bowl of noodles, and fall asleep on a worn-out couch. But at night, in her tiny rented room, where the yellow streetlight filtered through the window, Eliza would quietly stand in front of the mirror, practicing the basic boxing moves she learned from online videos. Each punch, each breath was a reminder she was still alive. She didn't come to the boxing gym to feel young again or get her body back, like so many who mocked her had assumed. She came because with every punch, she felt her breath grow stronger, her heart beat real, and the nightmares of fires and the desperate eyes of those she couldn't save eased, even just a little. But the young men in the gym didn't care about that. They only saw a skinny, bony woman, hands trembling, eyes tired. You think throwing a few punches makes you a hero. Careful, Grandma, don't break a bone and sue the gym. Laughter rippled through the air. Eliza lowered her head, took a long breath, clenched her fists, and stepped up to the heavy bag. She started to punch, slowly, steadily, each punch like a breath, like a silent prayer. In her frayed canvas bag, next to her old shoes, was a faded firefighter badge, the last gift her husband left her, still bearing a burnt corner. Eliza knew she was no longer young, no longer quick, but she still had one thing no one could take away: an unyielding courage. Outside, the rain continued to fall, streetlights reflecting trembling streaks of light on the wet pavement. The sound of her punches echoed, mixing with the distant laughter of those who had never survived the dark nights Eliza had lived through. They didn't know they had mocked the wrong person. The punches continued to echo in the old gym, blending with the clinking of chains, like the heartbeat of a tired heart that had never stopped beating. Eliza punched the heavy bag, each strike sending a jolt of pain through her wrist. She closed her eyes, memories flooding back, the acrid smell of smoke, the blare of fire truck sirens, the screams coming from the burning house, and the warm voice of her husband crackling over the radio. "Eliza, you okay? Keep your breathing steady. Don't be afraid." She remembered that day, finding the trembling 8-year-old boy in the smoky corner, his tear-filled eyes looking at her like she was an angel. She had carried him out of that blazing house. Black smoke stinging her eyes, the heat burning her skin. She survived. The boy survived. But her beloved husband never came back. That night, standing outside the scene, watching the building collapse in a roar, Eliza had screamed, sobbed, her shaking hands clutching the burnt firefighter badge she found near the scene. For years after, she carried that dull, aching pain, waking up in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, cold sweat running down her back whenever she heard the crack of splintering wood in her dreams. People say time heals all wounds, but for Eliza, time was just a dull knife, slicing slowly into her heart. Day after day, hour after hour, she left her firefighting job after her spinal injury, no longer strong enough to continue the work she once considered her life. In the days that followed, Eliza lived quietly, drifting through cheap, labor-intensive jobs, avoiding the pitying glances of those around her. To everyone else, she was just a skinny, tired woman, barely scraping by, with no future. But no one knew that every morning. She still got up early, jogging along the lake, listening to her own breath, feeling life still coursing through her veins. One autumn evening, sitting alone in her tiny room, Eliza happened upon a video of an older woman winning an amateur boxing match. The image of that woman raising her fist in victory, her eyes shining with pride, made Eliza break down in tears. She had forgotten what it felt like to believe in herself. She had forgotten how strong she once was. That night, Eliza stood up, pulled a chair into the center of the room, and began practicing slow punches, breathing steadily, sweat rolling down her cheek. In the mirror, she saw her own eyes, tired eyes, but still holding a flicker of fire. "You're stronger than anyone, Eliza. All you have to do is believe." Her husband's voice echoed in her mind, making her pause, tears streaming. But this time, she didn't collapse. She wiped her tears, clenched her fists, and continued practicing. The next day, she stopped by an old sporting goods store, buying a pair of worn boxing gloves, a few rolls of hand wraps, and a discounted pair of sneakers. When the clerk asked, "Buying these for your grandson?" Eliza smiled, her gaze calm. "No, I'm buying them for myself." That morning, For the first time in years, Eliza felt alive, not just surviving, but she didn't know that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The world doesn't pave the way for women over 40, even less for those who have once fallen. But Eliza was ready. That morning, Seattle was cold and rainy, raindrops pattering on the patchy sidewalks under yellow streetlights. Eliza stood before Wolf Den Boxing Gym, the rusty iron sign swinging in the wind, clanging like a challenge. The foggy glass door opened, and the smell of sweat, muscle rub, and old leather boxing gloves hit her. The inside buzzed with noise, jump ropes slapping the floor, punching bags thumping rhythmically, heavy breathing, and curses mixing in the air. Eliza stood still for a moment, looking at the training floor covered in a thin layer of dust, sweat stains marking the wooden planks. She gripped her canvas bag strap, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. Eyes fixed straight ahead. Instantly, eyes turned toward her. In the corner, a group of young men paused, sneering. Did Granny get lost or something? Came for yoga, but ended up in boxing. Huh. Eliza didn't answer. Walking up to the front desk, the young woman behind the counter looked up, momentarily startled, then forced a smile. "Can I help you with something?" "Ma'am." Eliza set her bag down, her voice calm. "I'd like to sign up for boxing." The young woman glanced nervously toward the training area, where the head coach, Patrick, a man in his 50s with a muscular build, silver beard, and sharp eyes, was observing. Patrick walked over, arms folded across his chest. "Are you sure boxing isn't for everyone?" Eliza looked up, her dark brown eyes unwavering. "I'm sure." Patrick studied her for a few seconds, then nodded slightly, signaling the young woman to take down her information. Eliza changed in the small locker room, the foggy mirror reflecting her thin frame, the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, her arms covered in old scars. She took a deep breath, smoothed back her graying hair, and carefully wrapped her hands, loop by loop, slowly and deliberately. When she stepped onto the training floor, she felt the scrutinizing stares, heard the whispers. "Look, she's actually going to train. Let's see how long she lasts." Eliza walked up to an old heavy bag, placed her hand on its rough surface, closed her eyes, and breathed slowly. She lifted her hand and threw the first punch, not strong, not perfectly executed, but enough to make the bag tremble slightly. She continued, punch after punch, breath after breath, sweat starting to bead on her temples. Each punch dragged up a memory, the blazing flames, the screams, the fire truck sirens in the night, and her husband's smile before he walked into the fire. She punched and punched again, each strike pushing away the fear and the haunting nightmares that had clung to her for over 10 years. Suddenly, a tall figure stepped up beside her. Brent Holloway, 25, standing over 6 feet tall, shoulders broad like a wall, the best fighter in the gym, stepped up with eyes full of scorn and curiosity. "What do you think you're doing here?" Eliza looked up, sweat rolling down her cheek, her eyes steady. "Training." Brent laughed loudly, glancing back at his friends who snickered. then leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "This ain't yoga, you know that, right? This place isn't for the weak." Eliza clenched her fist tighter, said nothing, and turned back to continue punching the heavy bag. Brent stood there for a moment, his gaze darkening, then scoffed and walked away, tossing a comment over his shoulder, "Don't come crying when you get hurt." In the days that followed, Eliza returned to the gym consistently. She arrived before everyone else and left after they were all gone. She jumped rope, hit the heavy bag, did crunches despite the pain in her back. Each time she stood up, she clenched her teeth, her sweat-soaked shirt sticking to her back, her old sneakers darkened by sweat. Some people looked at her with pity, some with disdain, some with smirks. But Eliza didn't care. She remembered her husband's last words before walking into that final fire, no matter what, "Don't give up." And Eliza knew she was stepping into a new battle, a battle with no fire alarms, no black smoke, no flames, but a battle against prejudice, loneliness, age, and the fear of failure. But she was ready. In her early days at Wolf Den Boxing Gym, Eliza continued her quiet training, arriving early, leaving late, never joining any training group. She jumped rope by herself, hit the heavy bag by herself, practiced footwork on the scratched wooden floor, ignoring the scornful glances that would slide over her before disappearing under the pounding rap music of the gym. But they didn't leave her alone for long. One afternoon, under heavy rain, Eliza was working the heavy bag when Brent and his crew walked in, loud laughter and stomping feet echoing on the wooden floor. "Still haven't given up yet," old lady Brent called out, holding a water bottle, tilting his head with a smirk. Eliza didn't answer, continuing to punch, each strike landing on the heavy bag, her breathing steady, eyes focused. Brent stepped closer, giving the bag a shove so it swung hard, throwing Eliza off balance, making her stumble back a step. Laughter erupted around the gym. "Careful there, Granny. Boxing isn't for those who fall easily." Eliza looked at him, her gaze calm, but with something cold flickering deep inside. She turned back, adjusted her stance, and continued punching, unfazed. They began openly provoking her. When Eliza picked up her jump rope, they would deliberately walk by and lightly kick it, tangling the rope. When she was doing push-ups, they would walk past, laughing. "Wow, how many can you do, Grandma?" When Eliza was putting her gloves away, they would kick them away, pretending to laugh and apologize. Eliza silently picked them up, continuing her training, sweat soaking the back of her shirt, sticking to her skin. One early morning, Eliza arrived at the gym as usual, with only the dim yellow lights on and the sound of rain tapping on the tin roof. She was practicing footwork when Brent walked in, a towel over his shoulder, chewing gum. "I need that bag." Eliza turned around, locking eyes with him, her voice calm. "I'm almost done." Brent gave a cold laugh, stepped up, and gave the bag a hard shove, forcing Eliza to stumble back a step. He started hitting the bag, ignoring her as if she didn't exist. Eliza stepped back, stood watching for a moment, then quietly moved to another heavy bag, continuing her training. She could not quit. She would not quit. Inside the gym, no one stood up for her. Coach Patrick saw it a few times, but only folded his arms, observing, nodding slightly at Brent as if in silent approval. To them, Eliza was just an old woman trying to force her way into the world of young men, a misfit and weakling who would give up sooner or later. One afternoon, while Eliza was jumping rope, another rope was thrown under her feet, causing her to trip, her knee slamming hard against the wooden floor, stinging with pain. Laughter rippled across the gym. Careful there. Granny Eliza pushed herself up, blood oozing from her knee, pulling out an old rag from her bag to wipe it away without a word, standing back up, picking up her rope, and continuing to jump. That night, Eliza returned to her tiny rented room, sitting on a wooden chair, unwrapping her hand wraps, washing off the dried blood on her knee. She looked at her hands, calloused, old scars and fresh bruises visible, the yellow light highlighting the blue veins beneath her skin. She played an old video where her husband, the firefighter who had given his life, smiled into the camera during a training session. Courage isn't not being afraid, Eliza. It's moving forward even when you're scared. Tears quietly streamed down her cheeks, mixing with the sweat still clinging to her neck. The next day, Eliza returned to the gym. Her knee still ached, each step sending a sharp pain up her spine, but she still tied her shoes, wrapped her hands, and stepped up to the heavy bag. She began to punch, each strike, one after another. Deep breaths, eyes focused, shutting out the mocking laughter behind her. Each punch was a promise to herself. Don't give up. Don't yield. Don't step back. For a moment, Patrick watched from afar, his eyes glinting with curiosity. He saw the way Eliza stood, how she kept her balance, how she breathed steadily even as sweat soaked her shirt. For a moment, Patrick remembered his own youth, training with his old coach, and he knew she was not just any ordinary woman. Eliza didn't know she was slowly drawing attention. She only knew one thing: no matter who mocked her, no matter who underestimated her, she would stay, she would keep punching, she would keep fighting. Because for Eliza, she wasn't just learning boxing, she was learning how to live again. Early in the morning, Seattle's rain drizzled, thin streams of water running down the foggy windows of Wolf Den Boxing Gym. Eliza walked in, as always, quietly hanging her coat, adjusting her hand wraps, placing her faded firefighter badge inside her canvas bag, and began her warm-up. But today, something was different. Coach Patrick stood near the sparring ring, arms folded, eyes following each of Eliza's punches against the heavy bag. He watched how she shifted her feet, her breathing steady, her wrists aligned at the right angle, each jab sharp and direct, quick and precise, unwavering, though still clumsy in some movements. Eliza displayed a patience and discipline he rarely saw in the young men eager to prove themselves. A few others in the gym started to notice as well. When Eliza picked up her jump rope, a sweaty young man, his hands still wrapped, quietly asked, "You jump a lot." "Huh?" Eliza looked up, smiled, didn't answer, only nodded gently, then continued to jump rope, the rope slicing the air with a steady whip. Whip, sound, drops of sweat falling onto the wooden floor, leaving a trail. That day, Patrick walked up to Eliza. "Have you boxed before?" Eliza shook her head. "No. I learned how to keep my balance while running through fires." Patrick paused, his eyes flashing with respect, then nodded. "Today, the sparring class is open for new people. If you want, you can join." Eliza looked at the sparring ring, where young fighters were slipping on gloves, laughing, their eyes glowing with excitement and fear. She knew this was a step everyone had to take, and she hadn't come just to punch heavy bags. She nodded. The sparring session began. Patrick paired them up. Eliza was paired with a young woman named Mia, about 22, small, her bright eyes showing a hint of nervousness. They touched gloves and began moving. Eliza kept her breathing steady, watching how Mia moved. Her jabs rushed, her back foot stepping too far, throwing her off balance. Eliza threw a light jab, just tapping Mia's glove, then stepped back, maintaining distance. Mia smiled, nodding, her eyes brightening. They continued, exchanging light punches, learning how to move, dodge, their breathing syncing with their footwork across the floor. But Brent wouldn't leave it alone. He stood outside the ring, arms folded, his eyes scornful as he watched Eliza look at Granny teaching the kid. Soft laughter came from his friends. Patrick glanced at Brent, then turned back to focus on the sparring. As the session was nearing its end, Brent stepped forward, his voice dragging Coach. "How about a round with the old lady here, so she can see what real boxing feels like?" The room went quiet. Mia looked at Eliza, eyes worried. Patrick frowned. "Brent, this is a training session, not a match." Brent shrugged, smirking. "I'll go easy." Eliza looked at Patrick, then nodded. "I'm ready." The bell rang. Brent moved in. Gloves up, eyes cold, step by step pressing Eliza into a corner. He threw a light jab, tapping her shoulder, then a hook. Not hard, but enough to make Eliza step back. "Here, learn this, Grandma." He laughed, his eyes taunting. Eliza took a deep breath, remembering her husband's words. "Don't panic. Observe. Breathe. Strike when it's time." She lowered her center of gravity, keeping her stance, starting to circle Brent, dodging his jabs, watching how he moved his feet, spotting the openings in his guard. Brent began to get frustrated when he couldn't hit Eliza easily. He stepped in faster, throwing a heavier hook, and Eliza tilted away, feeling the air brush her cheek, her hand tapping lightly on his stomach with a jab, just enough to make him pause for a second. The room fell silent. Brent scowled, stepping closer, readying a heavier punch. But Patrick raised his hand. "That's enough. Brent." Brent lowered his hands, eyes still locked on Eliza, his face a mix of confusion and anger. Eliza took off her gloves, smiled, and held out her hand. "Thank you." Brent looked at her thin hand for a moment, then reluctantly reached out, shaking it lightly, saying nothing. That day, Eliza went home, her hands trembling slightly as she poured water, but in the mirror, she saw her eyes shining brighter. For the first time in years, she felt herself coming back, no longer a faded shadow, merely surviving each day. In the days following her first sparring session, the atmosphere in Wolf Den boxing gym shifted in a way no one could explain. Brent no longer smirked when Eliza walked in, but his eyes followed her every step, every punch she landed on the heavy bag, every drop of sweat falling onto the damp wooden floor. Those who once mocked her began to fall silent, some even nodding slightly as she walked past. Eliza felt the change, but she didn't care. She continued her training as usual, arriving early, leaving late, practicing each jab, each hook, each footwork drill until her body was exhausted, her hands burning from the calluses. One Friday afternoon, as Eliza was wrapping her hands, preparing for her session, Brent walked over with a few of his friends, a smirk on his face. "You know what's happening next week, right?" Eliza looked up, her gaze calm. "What?" Brent shrugged, his voice even. "The annual gym challenge. It's open to all members. Tests of strength, technique, sparring, and endurance." He tilted his head, eyeing her as if trying to gauge her. "I think you should join, to see how long you can still last." Quiet chuckles rose from behind Brent, a few curious glances sneaking toward Eliza, waiting to see how she would respond. Eliza stayed silent. Inside, her heart pounded, a warm current rushing down her spine. She knew the gym challenge wasn't a joke. It was the day when Wolf Den's amateur fighters proved themselves, catching the attention of coaches and sometimes small local sponsors. For a woman in her 40s who had survived a spinal injury, this wasn't just a test of physical strength. It was a battle against the fear of failure, the humiliation of falling in front of a crowd, and the limits her body had imposed on her. Brent leaned down, bringing his mouth close to Eliza's ear, lowering his voice. "I don't think you've got it in you. Just stay home and rest, old lady." He smirked, turning away, leaving behind the scent of sweat and the sting of humiliation hanging in the air. That night, Eliza returned to her tiny rented room, letting herself sink into the old wooden chair that creaked under her weight. Her knee throbbed, her back numb. She looked at her hands, trembling, the yellow glow from the old bulb reflecting off the countless scars crisscrossing her skin. She opened a small wooden cabinet, taking out her husband's faded firefighter badge, placing it in the palm of her hand. Tears fell silently, landing on the scorched surface, spreading into faint wet streaks. "I'm so scared," Eliza whispered, her voice breaking. But then, through the salty tears, Eliza heard her husband's warm voice echo in her mind. "Be scared. That's fine, but don't stop." She closed her eyes, her fingers tightening around the badge until they went numb. Images of Brent's mocking smirk, the scornful eyes, the ridiculing laughter echoed in her head. No one gets to decide your limits. Eliza. The next morning, Eliza walked into the gym, her face calm, her eyes steady. She approached the front desk, where Patrick stood with the sign-up sheet for the gym challenge. He looked up, seeing Eliza, pausing slightly. "Are you sure?" Eliza didn't answer. She quietly picked up the pen, writing her name on the last line of the list. As she set the pen down, she looked up, her eyes glinting with an unfamiliar light. "I'm in." The entire gym seemed to freeze for a moment. A few people glanced at each other. Some smirked. Some looked at her with curiosity. Brent, standing nearby, gave a cold smile, nodding. "Good. Let's see how long you last." That day, Eliza doubled down on her training. She jumped rope until her legs screamed, ran on the treadmill until she was gasping for breath, practiced footwork until her ankles were numb, and punched the heavy bag until her hands burned. In the mirror, she saw herself drenched in sweat, breathing hard, but there was no fear in her eyes. She had chosen to enter this battle. For the first time in years, Eliza felt alive, not just surviving, but proving to the world, "I'm still here. I can still fight." The moment she signed her name for the gym challenge, Eliza knew there was no turning back. Every morning, when fog still blanketed Seattle's rain-soaked streets, she got out of bed, laced up her worn-out sneakers, and started running along the lake, where the still water reflected the pale yellow streetlights. With heavy breaths, each footfall hitting the wet ground, her heart pounding in rhythm with the raindrops. Eliza ran until her lungs burned, her legs went numb, her ankles ached, but she did not stop. In her mind, memories continued to surface. That night, the fire had erupted from an old wooden warehouse, flames consuming the night sky, thick black smoke reeking of burning. Eliza, in her heavy firefighter gear, had rushed in with her husband, searching for those trapped inside. "Eliza, stay close to me." Her husband's voice crackled through the radio, warm but urgent. She had found an 8-year-old boy in the corner, his wide eyes filled with fear, his small hand clutching hers. She had scooped him up, running out of the inferno, each breath heavy with smoke. When she turned back to find her husband, a massive explosion echoed, flames engulfing the doorway where he had just been. She screamed, but the only reply was the roar of fire. Every step Eliza ran now was a step away from that pain, a step to keep her promise to her husband to live on, not to give up. After each run, Eliza arrived at Wolf Den Gym before anyone else, while the fluorescent lights still flickered, the wooden floor cold, the heavy bags hanging motionless in the dark. She jumped rope, turn after turn, until her calves burned, then practiced footwork, circling the floor, dodging imaginary punches, breathing deep and steady. Sometimes Patrick, the coach, would arrive early, standing with arms folded, watching her. He didn't say anything, but his gaze gradually shifted from doubt to curiosity, to respect. One morning, as Eliza sat against the wall, breathing heavily, Patrick handed her a water bottle. "You don't have to push yourself this hard. Eliza looked up, her eyes firm. "I don't have another option." Patrick was silent for a moment, then nodded, walking away, leaving Eliza with her labored breathing but eyes burning with determination. In the evenings, Eliza continued training at home. She placed the old wooden chair in the center of the room, using it as an opponent, practicing dodging, countering, and maintaining her balance. When she grew tired, she leaned against the wall, holding her husband's firefighter badge, looking at it, whispering, "Would you be proud of me?" Outside, the rain drummed against the tin roof, reminding her of the crackling of flames from that night. But in her small room, Eliza felt warmth in her chest. She knew, no matter who laughed, she still had a reason to stand up, to keep punching, to keep breathing. A week before the challenge, Eliza sparred with Mia, the young woman she had trained with before. Mia gasped for breath, her gloves dropping, smiling. "You're really strong." Eliza smiled back, wiping sweat from Mia's forehead with a towel. Strength isn't about muscles. It's about not giving up. But across the room, Brent still watched, that half smirk clear on his face. He knew the gym challenge wasn't just a fitness test. It was an underground proving ground, where the strongest proved themselves, where the weak were exposed, pushed out, becoming the butt of jokes. And he believed Eliza wouldn't last. But Eliza wasn't training to prove anything to Brent or to anyone else. She trained because she needed to prove to herself that she still had value, still had strength, that a piece of the firefighter still lived in her veins. On the final evening before the challenge, Eliza sat on the wooden floor, wrapping her hands one last time, the yellow light illuminating her sweat-soaked, deeply tired face. She closed her eyes, placing her hand on her chest, listening to her heartbeat, to each breath, whispering, "Tomorrow, I will stand up for every time I've fallen." Saturday morning. Seattle was colder than usual. Thin rain sliding down the bus windows as Eliza sat quietly, gripping the strap of her old canvas bag, eyes watching the grey streets blur by. Today was Wolf Den Gym Challenge Day. The gym was busier than usual, the air thick with the smell of sweat, adhesive tape, and the faint scent of adrenaline. Cheers, laughter. The sound of gloves hitting bags echoed throughout. Eliza stepped in, her grey hoodie covering her greying hair, her face calm, but her hands clenched in her pockets, trembling slightly. In the corner, Brent was laughing with his friends, his eyes flicking toward Eliza, smirking. Granny showed up. "Huh? Don't cry when you collapse." Soft laughter rippled, some eyes filled with pity, others with mockery. Eliza said nothing, walking to the registration table, receiving her number, sticking it to her shirt, then setting her bag down to start warming up. Round 1, the strength challenge. The whistle blew, and Eliza, along with the others, began doing burpees, push-ups, squats, and continuous jump roping. Heavy breaths filled the room, sweat dripping onto the damp wooden floor. Eliza felt her knee stab with pain, her back aching with every squat, her breathing ragged, threatening to give out. The laughter and shouting around her faded, leaving only the pounding of her heartbeat. "You're stronger than anyone, Eliza. All you have to do is believe." Her husband's voice rang clearly in her mind, soft and gentle. Eliza clenched her jaw, continuing, not stopping, rep after rep, until the whistle blew again. Round 2, technique test. One by one, participants stepped onto the floor, performing combinations of punches, footwork, dodges and counters under the strict eyes of Patrick and the guest judges. Eliza stepped up, tightening her gloves, taking a deep breath, eyes focused. She began to move each jab, each hook, each angled step, breathing steady, eyes locked on the target, a right hook, an uppercut, stepping back, dodging, countering with a quick jab. Not as powerful as the young men, but each strike was solid, precise, and strangely calm. As she finished, a few people nodded, Patrick looking at her with an unreadable expression before giving a small nod. Round 3, endurance test. Sprints around the room, pushing heavy sleds, rope climbs. Eliza felt her lungs burning, sweat soaking her shirt, her ankles aching. In the corner, Brent stood with arms folded, watching her with amusement, waiting for her to collapse. Eliza stepped up to the sled, placing her hands on the cold bar, bending down, taking a breath, and began to push. Each step, every inch the sled moved, sent a searing pain across her back. But Eliza did not stop. No one gets to decide your limits. She remembered her promise to her husband, remembered the night of the fire, the screams, the eyes of the little boy she had saved, looking at her like a hero. Suddenly, a cheer rang out. "Come on, you can do it." It was Mia, the young woman who had sparred with Eliza, standing in the corner, her eyes shining, her mouth smiling in encouragement. Eliza tightened her grip, bracing herself, pushing the sled a bit further before collapsing when it ended, gasping for air, sweat dripping onto the wooden floor, mixing with tears. A moment of silence. Patrick walked over, reaching out his hand to pull Eliza up. He didn't say anything, only nodded, his eyes reflecting a respect Eliza had never seen from him before. Final round, the public sparring match. Patrick announced the final sparring match of the day, the most important part, where participants would be tested in both spirit and skill. Who wants to step into the ring? The air tightened like a stretched cord. Brent stepped forward, raising his hand with a smile. "I want in." He turned, locking eyes with Eliza. "And I want to fight her." The room buzzed. A few people widened their eyes, some shook their heads, whispering, "He's going to humiliate her." Eliza looked at Brent, her gaze calm, lowering it briefly toward the firefighter badge in her bag, then lifting her eyes with a voice soft but steady. "All right." The challenge day had brought Eliza to the edge of her limits, but now she was ready to step into the most important fight of all. The air inside Wolf Den Gym thickened as Eliza stepped into the sparring ring. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet, cold sweat running down her spine. She stood facing Brent, tall, young, strong, eyes filled with a mix of contempt and thrill, his gloved fists tightening, knuckles cracking. Around the ring, fighters and onlookers gathered, eyes fixed. Some shook their heads, others looked at Eliza with concern, while Mia clenched her fists, whispering softly, "You got this." The bell rang. Brent charged immediately, using his size to pressure, throwing rapid jabs, forcing Eliza back into a corner. "This is real boxing. Old lady," he shouted, throwing a sweeping hook that cut through the air. Eliza tilted her body to dodge, but the wind from the punch slapped her cheek, leaving her dizzy. Murmurs echoed around the ring. Eliza took a deep breath, stepping back, raising her guard. Every breath burned, her heartbeat pounding like drums in her chest. In that moment, she saw the flames rising, heard her husband yelling through the radio. "Eliza, breathe. Don't panic." Eliza tightened her fists, looking at Brent rushing toward her, her eyes lighting up. Brent threw another jab. Eliza tilted her head, blocking with her left hand, countering with a light hook to his ribs with her right. A dry thud echoed. Brent froze for a second, eyes darkening. Then he roared, rage flushing his face. "You dare!" He lunged forward, throwing a straight punch, but Eliza dipped to the side, pivoting on her foot, her left hand pushing his arm aside while her right hooked into his ribs again. Murmurs turned to light claps around the ring, eyes beginning to change as they watched Eliza. Brent stepped back, taking a deep breath, eyes darkening before smirking, "Not bad, old lady." He started to fight with more caution, each jab precise, forcing Eliza to keep moving. Her breathing grew heavier, each step triggering sharp pain in her old knee, her back aching with every shift. Eliza remembered the nights training alone, the sweat, the silent tears, the eyes of the boy she once saved, the look her husband gave her before entering the fire. "Be scared, but don't stop." Brent launched a stronger hook. Eliza pivoted lightly, countering with a jab straight into his chest. The punch wasn't strong, but it was precise, enough to make Brent step back. Confusion flickering in his eyes. The clapping grew louder. Eliza's breath was ragged, her hands trembling, sweat soaking her gloves, her vision blurring. But she did not fall. Brent roared, throwing what he thought would be the finishing punch. But Eliza shifted, her left hand deflecting his arm, her right hooking into his side again, her foot sweeping lightly at his leg. Brent stumbled, slipped, and his large frame crashed onto the floor with a thunderous thud that echoed across the gym. Silence. Eliza stood, breathing heavily, arms dropping, her eyes looking down at Brent lying on the floor, his eyes wide with anger and disbelief. No one spoke until Patrick began to clap, the applause starting scattered, then growing louder, until the entire gym was filled with the sound of clapping. Eliza bent down, extending her hand, her eyes softening. "Get up." Brent looked at her, his eyes torn between pride and shame. He reached up, and Eliza grasped his hand, pulling him to his feet. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Brent looked at her without contempt, but with silent acknowledgement. Patrick stepped forward, placing a hand on Eliza's shoulder, nodding. "Well done." Eliza removed her gloves, stepping out of the ring, her body aching, every step a fire through her joints. But she smiled. In the mirror, she saw herself, sweaty, blood from a cut on her lip, but her eyes were glowing. She knew, today, she had won, not because she defeated Brent, but because she had defeated fear, doubt, and the mockery that had weighed on her for so many years. She was still here, still standing, still fighting. That night, Eliza returned to her small room, her body sore, each painful step reminding her of every punch, every dodge, every fall that had happened in the sparring ring that afternoon. She unwrapped her hands, the skin on her knuckles torn, bleeding. Her hands trembled as she used a warm towel to clean the dried blood, gently applying the last of the old ointment from her cabinet. In the mirror, Eliza saw her eyes, hollow with exhaustion, but burning with determination. The small cut on her lip had scabbed over, her cheek still swollen and bruised. But the pain was no longer the same as it was in the ring. "I did it. Did you see that?" she whispered softly, placing her hand over her husband's faded firefighter badge, her eyes softening in the moment. The next morning, Eliza woke up to a deep ache throughout her body. Her old knee throbbed. Her shoulder burned when she lifted her arm, her spine stiff and sore. But she still put on her grey hoodie, slipped on her worn sneakers, picked up her old canvas bag, and stepped outside, walking down the cold, rainy street toward Wolf Den Gym. When Eliza entered, the noisy gym fell silent for a moment. Eyes turned to her, no longer with mockery or pity, but with quiet respect. Mia ran up, her eyes bright. "Are you okay?" "You were amazing." Eliza smiled, gently ruffling the young woman's hair. "Thank you." Patrick, standing near the heavy bags, his expression stern, gave a small nod as Eliza approached. "You did well yesterday." Eliza nodded, her eyes reflecting trust, needing no words. But the most unexpected moment came from Brent. He walked into the gym, no loud laughter as usual, no friends surrounding him, only an odd silence. Brent walked straight toward Eliza, his eyes avoiding hers at first, before looking up to meet her gaze. He swallowed, clenched his hands, and exhaled, his voice rough. I'm sorry." The entire gym fell quiet. Mia stopped jumping rope. Patrick's stern eyes settled on Brent. Eliza stood still, looking into Brent's eyes for the first time, seeing no arrogance, but true remorse. "I was wrong about you. You're stronger than I thought. Stronger than a lot of people here." His voice trembled, then fell silent. Eliza smiled, nodding gently. "I didn't come here to beat anyone. I came to beat myself." Brent lowered his head, then extended his hand, his calloused palm shaking slightly. Eliza grasped his hand, firm and steady. That day, the atmosphere at Wolf Den Gym changed. Women who had once stayed in the corners, afraid, stepped closer to the heavy bags. Mia trained harder, sparred confidently, her eyes no longer hesitant. Brent started helping newcomers, adjusting their stances, teaching them how to breathe. His eyes no longer haughty. He arrived earlier, stayed later, quieter, focused, and serious. Patrick watched it all, smiling softly before walking up to Eliza as she wrapped her hands, preparing to train. "Have you thought about teaching a self-defense class for women here?" Eliza paused, looking at Patrick, her eyes glistening under the dim fluorescent lights of the gym. "I've never thought about it, but maybe it's time." That day, Eliza began training with a group of 3 women, including Mia, on the old wooden floor of Wolf Den. She taught them how to stand firmly, how to hold their fists properly, how to breathe, how to counter when needed. "Strength isn't about knocking someone down," Eliza said, her eyes serious. "Strength is about getting back up when someone tries to push you down." In a moment, Eliza looked around, seeing Mia smiling, seeing women throwing their first jabs confidently, seeing Brent teaching a young boy how to jump rope, seeing Patrick standing with arms folded, his eyes glowing. She realized that yesterday's fight had not only changed her, but it was changing this entire gym. And Eliza smiled. She was no longer the frail woman quietly avoiding people's eyes, quietly running in the rain at night. She had become a small flame, quietly igniting courage in those around her. The jump ropes sliced through the air. Breaths were heavy. The thud, thud of punches echoed steadily across Wolf Den Gym. But today, those sounds were different. There was no more mocking laughter, no more contemptuous eyes, no more fear hiding in the corners of the room. Instead, there were focused eyes, encouraging smiles, and fists tightening in gloves with determination. Eliza stood in the middle of the training floor, wearing her old grey hoodie, holding her gloves, her eyes lighting up as she watched the young women training. Eliza's first self-defense class had begun. Mia, eyes bright, threw a straight jab at the heavy bag. Her face flushed, but her eyes full of determination. "Good, Mia. Breathe. It's not about power. It's about precision." Eliza stepped forward, adjusting the stance of another young woman, her hand resting lightly on her shoulder, her voice warm. "No one has the right to make you feel weak. You have the right to protect yourself." Across the room, Brent was adjusting a young boy's stance as he learned to jump rope, his eyes patient and gentle. He looked over at Eliza, nodding slightly, gratitude flickering in his eyes. Brent was no longer the arrogant young man. He had become part of the change in this place. Patrick stepped up, placing a hand on Eliza's shoulder. "You changed this place." Eliza shook her head, smiling. "No, they changed themselves. I only did what I had to do." Patrick looked at her, a soft smile on his face. "Either way, thank you." Eliza walked toward the heavy bag, pulling on her gloves, standing still for a moment. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as images came flooding back the flames that night. The sound of fire truck sirens, the eyes of the boy she saved, the smile of her husband before he walked into the fire. "I did it, you know," she whispered. Eliza began to punch, Each strike firm, unhurried, not for show. Each punch echoed steadily like a heartbeat, each breath moving with her rhythm, a strike for every time she had been underestimated, a strike for every time she had fallen, a strike for every woman still afraid, still doubting herself. When she stopped, Eliza removed her gloves, breathing slowly, a drop of sweat falling onto the wooden floor, joining the sweat of those who had trained here before her. She looked around the gym, seeing women smiling as they trained, seeing Brent patiently guiding others, seeing Patrick nodding at newcomers. She knew she had fulfilled her purpose here. She was not a superhero. She was still the woman who had once fallen, once cried alone at night, once doubted her worth, once trembled under the judgmental eyes of others. But she had learned how to get back up, and she believed you could too. If you're watching this video, maybe you've been underestimated too. Maybe you've felt like you're not good enough, not strong enough. Maybe you've felt fear under the gaze of others. I don't know what battles you're fighting. I don't know what wounds you carry. But I know you don't have to be perfect to start. You only need to start. Even if you're still afraid, you don't have to conquer the world. You only need to conquer your fear, one step at a time. You deserve respect. You deserve love. You deserve to stand up and keep going, no matter how hard it gets. If Eliza could do it, you can too.